Why are we in my kitchen? Because I'm in the middle of filming 3 other videos, and this is just where all my cameras and stuff are set up right now. So, anything you can knit on the knitting machine, you can knit by hand. But not everything that you can knit by hand can you make on the knitting machine. Top-down round yoke sweaters are really popular right now, but they are impossible to do on the knitting machine. What you can do is bottom-up round yoke sweaters. I have made several of these based on a Susan Guaglielmi pattern that appears to have been lost to the internet. She retired recently and took down most of her resources. It might still be out there somewhere, but I've lost my copy of it. And I was never able to get these sweaters to fit quite right because it was a traditional pattern with a gauge that you had to try to get and then only a handful of sizes, and I just don't work well under those conditions. So it's time to draft my own. These sweaters are knit bottom up. So you knit the sleeves up to the underarm bind off with a little bit of shaping. Then you knit the body panel up to the underarm bind off. And there's a little more shaping on the front than there is on the back, and I will show you how to do that. And then you rehang all the stitches on the bed, knit up, take everything off on waste yarn, decrease the number of stitches, hang them back on the bed, and then keep knitting, and use that for a couple sections. I already have a round yoke pattern up on my website, but it has 8 sleeves. This pattern will only have 2. So let's figure this out. So for this sweater, we're going to knit the body panel bottom up to the underarm bind off, and then a little bit of decreasing. And then this is going to be waste yarn. These are going to be live stitches taken off on waste yarn. And then the same for the sleeves. We knit the bottom, and then this section down here is ribbing, of course. We knit the bottom, we knit the cuff, we knit up to the underarm, bind off, and then a little bit of decreasing, and then these are live stitches. And then there will be 2 sleeves, of course. Knit the same. I just don't have good drawing skills. And then we're going to take everything from the center of the sleeves through here, rehang it on the machine, and then knit up. And then take this off on waste yarn and rehang it at a smaller size. And the way that you do that is while you're rehanging the live stitches, you double up every other stitch. So this is actually 2/3 the width of the one below it. And then you keep doing that until you get to your desired width. So this part's pretty easy because I can get like the width of your torso and figure out how big this needs to be, and like the width of your hand and then the width of your bicep, and calculate this. And then we know how many stitches we're binding off. Let's call this, so this is 1 inch. That's 1 inch. And then, so I need to talk about the shaping for the front. So normally when you're shaping a top-down round yoke sweater, you add short row shaping to the back of the neck. We're not going to do that. We're going to add short row shaping to the front of the bodice instead. The way that we do that is, so we are going to cast on, I'm going to knit up, we do the bind off, and then while we're doing the decreases for this little shaping here, we're also going to short row. So for the sweaters that I draft for a crew neck, I dip down 1 inch in the back for the back of the crew neck, and I dip down just 3 inches in the front for the front of the crew neck. So 3 minus 1 is 2. So this distance is going to be 2 inches. So that means that this distance is going to be 2 inches. So it needs to be consistent on the front and the back so that the sleeves fit together correctly. So that's going to be 1 inch, and this is going to be 2 inches here. So that means it's going to be 2 inches everywhere, so that we can get the shaping within those decreases there. And I think it's just going to be like a decrease every other, 1 decrease each side every other row to make that make sense. And then we rehang all the stitches, and then this is where it gets interesting. I think I'm going to dynamically figure out how many decreases to do and how many of these panels to do based on the size of the top of these live stitches. So like each of these decreases is 2/3 of the size below it, and I want to decrease until I get to the neck width that I want. And the neck width that I want, so if the average human head is about 22 inches in circumference, and then we're going to put ribbing on this at the end, but the ribbing is going to be either at the same size or different. Let me think about that. So let's call this, so we're going to do this in 2 halves. There's like the front half and then the back half. So the front half, let's call that We want to get to 10 inches. For the last section is going to be ribbing, and ribbing stretches a lot. So we're going to take this off and put it back on as many times as we can, decreasing it to 2/3 the size of the panel below it until we get to something that is 10 inches, and then that'll be the last chunk of ribbing. And then this distance here is going to be, when I drafted my set in sleeve crew neck pattern, I included one measurement, which was the armhole depth, which is this distance here. And for the sleeve for the round neck, I'm going to have 2 inches of decreases. So it's just going to be the depth, the armhole depth minus 2 is this distance here. So armhole minus 2. And then we also have the shoulder distance is going to factor into this, because this, while it decreases, actually gets pulled. Come on. This, as it decreases, doesn't stay flat. It gets pulled on the edge. So like along this edge, these will be connected together like it is on this one, and it'll form the shoulder seam here. So this distance here is actually related to both the armhole depth and the width of the shoulders to get to the point where we get to the neckline. And generally, the way that I draft my sweater patterns, the neckline is 7.5 inches wide. So we're going to have shoulder width minus 7.5 inches. So this distance here is going to be the armhole depth minus 2 plus the shoulder width minus 7.5 inches. And I know that doesn't make so much sense now, but it will. So I know how tall this is going to be, and I know how wide it needs to be here, so I can figure out the number of decreases and then evenly distribute the number of rows I need to get to that height amongst that number of decreases. And that's easy to do in code. Like by hand it'd be a nightmare, but in code I can just do it and just make it happen. So there we have sweater pattern. And I recognize that it doesn't look like much now, but I'm going to go try to translate this to code, and then we will prototype. Do y'all get anything out of these videos? Like, do you understand what's going on in my head? Because like, I barely understand what's going on in my head, and I have things in my head that don't always translate to what other humans think. It works in my head. I assure you of that. Okay. Let's go turn this into some JavaScript and make it happen. So this is my pattern for the round yoke sweater. On the left is the code, and on the right is what it's going to look like on the website. I'm doing this on a staging server because the way that this hosting platform is set up, they don't do port forwarding correctly. So if I edit the live site, then nobody can use it for a little while after it goes from its like editing mode to its precompiled mode. This is a React thing. They can do better than this. I talked to them. I contacted them to try to figure out how to set up port forwarding, and they're like, it's just not possible. Okay, so here we go. We have some input stuff. We need gauges, and then a gauge for the ribbing, and then a gauge for the yoke, with the assumption that you will be making the sweater doing some kind of ferrule on the yoke. If you're making the yoke just plain knitting, then you can put in the same gauges you did for the body of the sweater. And then measurements about the size of the human. And then I have some functions to pull out some main abstractions, like the number of stitches you're putting together on the top of the body before you start knitting the yoke. And then the math to figure out the number of rows in the yoke, and the math to figure out the number of sections in the yoke. And I'm just iterating to figure this out. I'm sure there's a closed form solution, but I don't have the time and energy to figure it out. And this runs like once or twice in the code base, and it's a little bit of JavaScript. It's fine. It's fine to brute force some stuff sometimes. And then we have short row cadence for the shaping the front neckline, because it needs to be lower than the back neckline. Okay, and then this is the cast-on hem rendering. This renders the cast-on hem for both the body and the sleeves. I just reused that stuff. Okay, and then this is what it looks like for these measurements and this gauge. We're casting on for the back body panel, doing that first, and then the front body panel, and then we make the sleeves, and then we start pulling it on and off the machine. And I left a note here that the math is a little fuzzy, and if your measurements aren't perfect, don't worry about it too much. And I did put some thought into how I wanted to do the yoke for the sweater. The Susan Guaglielmi pattern has like, the first section is a big chunky section that gets you up to like where the shoulders are. I decided to skip that because the way that I'm doing the decreases under the arms and the body, the circumference when you get to that point is a little bit bigger than it needs to be for the size of the human underneath it. So I'd opted to make all of my sections roughly the same instead of doing one big section and then a bunch of little tiny sections. But I'm going to make a prototype and see how that goes. I already posted a link to this to my staging server in the Discord. If you are a member of this channel on YouTube, you have access to our Discord where people like talk about knitting machines, and I post some behind the scenes stuff and then like stuff like this, so you get early access to patterns. And so far I've gotten a little bit of feedback about the wording, which I need to clean up for the yoke, but I don't think anyone's actually made it yet. So let me make it and see how it goes. Here we have our first major issue. If I had done my math right, this would be centered, but 0 is here, and this goes from about 64 to about 51. So either the math for the sleeve, this distance is wrong, or the math for how long this should be is wrong, or both of them are wrong. And that's going to mess up the way that I calculate the rows and the segments for the yoke. So I'm going to go back and try to fix that in the pattern before I continue. I'm stopping here because this is not right. So I set this up so all my sections would be the same width, and that's not going to work here. It gets too thin too quickly. Like this is supposed to stretch over my entire shoulders, and like even that is supposed to stretch over part of my shoulder. So I need to go back and look at the pattern. This is why the Susan Guaglielmi pattern had the first section that you knit be big, chunky, and thick, because it takes up the distance between where we've bound off for the underarm and where the shoulder starts. So that's all one length, and then it only starts narrowing after that. So I'm going to go back and fix that. I also suspect that The length here is too long, but I need to redo the math on that. And then maybe the circumference when we get to the neck is also too small because this is supposed to be half of it. That's not quite right. It's supposed to get decreased one more time. So I need to take another look at the math there and make sure it's right. And also, I realized that the short rows for the front are not quite right. So I need to go back and fix the math on that. I had both the number of stitches available across the top of the piece wrong, but also forgot that the cadence happens. The cadence for short rows is not, we don't short row every row, we short row every other row because the carriage has to go back and forth. So I need to work that into the math, but it is fixable. And like on this piece, I'm not going to redo this piece because it's just like a flat section at the top. I'm not even going to unravel all of this. I'm just going to, when I fix the math for the top yoke part, I'm just going to do the front of it. And then we can compare the before and after of these pieces and then go back and unravel this later if I decide I like what the new thing is. We are back. So I refactored the code and this is what we've got. So this bottom stripe goes all the way from the underarm to where the shoulder would be on a side and sleeve crew neck sweater. And then the smaller stripes on top are dynamically calculated based on the rest of the measurements. And this looks about right when this is fully assembled and on me. And blocked, of course, it should fit correctly. So this is the front of the sweater. And then I'm going to unravel the back and redo it so that it mirrors the front. And I like to leave the waist yarn on until the very end because if there are issues, then you can just unravel it to the waist yarn and put everything back on the machine. But it's looking good. It's looking like it might be what I want it to be. So it would fit like this. And then that goes there. And then we got tiny little sleeves here. Trust me, it makes sense. Just not quite yet. All right, let me unravel this. Here we are at the end of this project. Well, not quite the end. It still needs some assembly. Oh, crap. Have I screwed this up? Did I screw this up? No, it just needs to be rotated. Oh, crap. What am I doing? No, did I do this wrong? I did this wrong. I have a twisted sleeve, and there's no way to fix this. Oh my god, I got this far into the project. I've finished off the neckline, and I have a twisted sleeve. So when this part is not twisted, this part is twisted. Oh my god, I'm having a bad day. I'm having a bad day. I could theoretically cut this and redo it. I don't know if I want to. So other than that, I'm pretty happy with this pattern. I would like to finish off the yoke and try it on, because it's going to be something like this. And then that'll be closed down there, and then that'll be closed down there. But with the twisted sleeve, like there's no way to finish this. It's topologically impossible. I might just sew up the yoke and then see how it fits over my head, just to make sure it's quite right, because I actually drafted this sweater for a different video, and I'm going to make a full version of this at some point. But this is really disappointing, the twisted sleeves. I should have figured that out when I was rehanging the stitches on the bed. So this happened while I was rehanging stitches on the bed. This got twisted. And the only way to fix it is to rip all of this back and then redo it. And I really don't want to do that right now. Disappointing! Okay, I need to be done for the day. I really do. We are back, and I did wind up finishing my first prototype. I had to put in a lifeline under where did I put it in? Because I got it twisted. Was it a whole thing? I don't even remember. I have photos that I will attach to this video. I had to put in a lifeline, undo a line of stitches, and flip the piece, and then kitchen stitch it back, and I can't even remember where, but somewhere. So this is the first prototype, and it's okay. I think I left the armhole depth a little too deep, so it fits a little funky. Actually, let me just show you. Here we go. The fit is a little funky, as you can tell, I'm sure, but it's mostly okay. I fixed the short row cadence under here, in the code, and I'm just going to decrease the armhole depth for my next prototype. But I did make a second prototype on the Centro, which that video is up if you want to go check it out. And I found when doing this that the way I'm doing the underarm decreases doesn't really make sense for like a much bigger gauges. And if I ever want to do anything with like a tuck stitch with this, it's really not going to make any sense because you wind up decreasing a bunch, like irrespective of what's actually going on. So I'm going to change that in the code. The way that I did that with my set-in sleeve crew neck is that like you do the bind off for the underarm shelf and then you do like an inch of decreases and then it gets to the rest of it. So I'm going to change the code to do that, to do underarm bind off and then an inch of decreases instead of this whole like just decrease every other row until you get to 2 inches high, because it makes more sense that way. And also I realized that this pattern works better for like looser gauges. This is a kind of a tight tension for this yarn that I used on this one. So it's not stretching well, it's not laying nicely, but hold on. When I made it on the Centro, and this is a much looser knit because that's just how the Centro works and you can't really control the gauge, it fits a lot better. It makes a lot more sense as a round yoke sweater. So my next attempt is going to be with a much looser knit. I have my bulky set up right now because I was making my mom some socks for her birthday, some like chunky sleep socks. And I have a bunch of this Craft Smart acrylic that I got for a different project and a video that I haven't finished. And I dug some old gauge swatches out of my stash, so we are going to make the second real prototype. This is the third prototype. We'll call this a second prototype, but I did kind of change things on the fly for this one. We'll make the third prototype with this stuff and a much looser gauge, like looser knit, and we'll go from there and see how it goes. But first I need to make the changes to the pattern and then do all the stuff and the things. we are back. This is my third prototype, and I think I'm happy with this at this point. I did find one issue where I was calculating the number of short rows that needed to be in hold based on the number of needles that I had after the decreases and not before, so I fixed that in the code. I feel like there's one more thing. Oh, and the way I wrote the instructions for doing the decreases for the front, you do it every other row instead of every row. I fixed that, so now it makes more sense. And I incorporated the ribbing into the top section of the yoke instead of doing it separately because it was just easier that way. So, here's the sweater. This is more like what I'm going for. And this is kind of the fit that I want out of this kind of sweater. You can see. This hasn't been blocked yet. I think once I actually make a sweater out of this, I'm going to steam block it. One of the things that I'm not thrilled about is that the shoulder seam winds up sitting a little forward because of the shape of a human, essentially. I think if I were to go back and really, really revise this, and this is not necessary, and I'm not actually going to do this, I would put more of the front yoke stitches towards the front. Like, there would be fewer stitches attached to the back than there are attached to the front, if that makes sense, and that would just like shift the shoulder seam back a little bit. And you would do that like from the shoulder, from the top of the sleeve. But I'm not going to do that. I'm happy with this pattern. This is not all that wearable prototype. I think these colors are like maybe old school Taco Bell or like old school Burger King? I can't recall. Like some fast food restaurant from my childhood had these colors in their logo. And this is not a wearable sweater, but I have a bunch more yarn and this stuff is all the same weight. And the plan for this is to make, okay, so the original plan for the sweater, like all round yoke sweaters, was to make it doable with Fair Isle. That's the whole point. That's why I drafted it so you can have a different gauge for the yoke than you have for the body. So I'm going to go through and find some Fair Isle patterns and make myself another wearable sweater out of this green, like kind of chunky with white and the contrast in the yoke for Fair Isle patterns. I have, where is it? Hold on. I got the Doodle Knit Directory book. I like the doodles from Jamie Lomax because they are like good Fair Isle motifs, and like I don't actually follow patterns. I just here for the Fair Isle stuff, and she wrote a book. Got a bunch of like Fair Isle patterns. I think I'm gonna turn some of these into digital versions so that I can use AYAB to knit my sweater. So let me go do that, and then I will make my sweater. Okay, I have knit most of the sweater. And I didn't film any of it because I didn't feel like it, and you've seen this all before. I'm happy with my instructions for the body panels and the front now, and the sleeves. This is the front, this is the back. That's a sleeve. I have another sleeve somewhere. I swear I knit two. There it is. There's a second sleeve. Should I have prototyped my Fair Isle stuff before? Yes, I should have. I didn't. I chose not to. I kind of wanted to see how much yarn I had left, because if I didn't have enough of the green, I would have wound up having to use another color, but I have a little more than 2 skeins left. I've got this, and then there's some more skeins still in the machine. So I think I have enough to finish the yoke, but I should definitely prototype the Fair Isle stuff first, just to see what I like and how I do it. I have already digitized those so they are in the right form to be used by AYAB, and a reminder that 270 support is coming in the next release for AYAB. I'm just working on the bleeding edge because that's what I feel like doing. So the way that I drafted this sweater, you input the gauge for the whatever pattern yarning you're doing on the yoke, and then you can redistribute the rows a little bit between the different sections of the yoke. You should still wind up with the same total number of rows in the yoke, and try not to like put too much of the first band into the second two, or it's going to have weird proportions. But I'm going to have to fudge the values a little bit to get the placement that I want and to get the look that I want. Let me knit up some of these designs and see what I like. So in the process of swatching, I realized I don't have enough yarn to swatch the way that I want to, so I'm gonna do what I always tell y'all not to do and wing it. but I'm going to use this motif for the first big chunk of the sweater. I need to knit, hold on, where's my pattern? So the first band I need to knit for the round yoke is 33 rows high, and this repeat is 23 rows. So I'm going to knit a handful of rows, knit the fair isle, and then knit a handful of more rows before I take it off on waist yarn and put it back on. And then the subsequent bands after that are, what is it? So this repeat is 13 rows, and the second chunk is 15, so I'll knit one row, get it started, and then I'll have one row left of plain knitting before I take it off on waist yarn and put it back on. And then I've got a handful more patterns that are shorter than that, so I'll knit like a handful of rows, knit the pattern, and then a handful more before I do the ribbing on the neckline. And that's about it for the sweater. I'm just going to rehang things and fair isle them. And I have turned on end needle selection for my carriage. On the 270, that happens like up underneath the carriage. You have to flip a lever so that there will be a nice selvage edge for my fair isle that'll get incorporated into the side seam. So let's do this. Let me figure out how I'm going to film this. I might move that over there and then do it that way. Okay, cool. Cool. Okie dokie then. So I'm almost done with the knitting for the sweater, but I'm making a little modification and I want to explain why. This is not going back into the pattern. This is just me playing with this particular sweater. So this is the back side and I knit exactly as the instructions told me. And I wound up with this section feeling a little too chunky because like it's gonna fit along my shoulders and then that might be a little too high on the neck. So I think instead of knitting the full 15 rows, I'm only gonna knit like 13? Did it come out to 13? Instead of knitting the front according to the instructions, I knit fewer rows and I like this better, both in the way it looks and the way that it looks like it's going to fit on me. So I'm going to rip back the back version, the back side of it, and redo this. And this is why we leave the waist yarn on until the very end. So if you don't like part of the sweater, you can just fix it. And it's really easy to go back to the last row of waist yarn. And then I'm going to do something a little different for the neckline. Instead of just doing ribbing that stops and then is bound off, I'm going to knit like 2.5 inches of ribbing and then fold it over and secure it on the back. And I'll show you how I do that when I get there. Okay, time to redo this section. This is like feeling very festive because I'm filming this still before Christmas. I don't know when this is going to get out, but probably after Christmas. Like a nice winter sweater, and this is going to be chunky and warm, and I'm excited about that. If I get cold, and then I just don't get warm again. And this is probably causing problems with my microphone, so let me get back to knitting. It's done. Well, all the knitting is done. Oh boy, where is it? Okay, so this is the front, this is the back, and this is what I did with the neckline. Instead of knitting the ribbing up to the top and then doing a sewn bind off, I did one extra row of plain stockinette, and now I'm going to fold this over and secure it so we get this doubled up neckline. The same thing that I have on the Bill Yates tutorial sweater. I just like this a little bit more than the flat stuff. So order of operations here. This can get a little complicated and it is easy to screw up, but at this point it's fine. So first I'm going to secure the neckline down, and then I'm going to seam up the yoke seams. So anywhere that yoke meets yoke gets seamed up. And I have two sections here. If you wind up with a piece that is bigger than what fits on your machine, you need to break these into multiple sections, and then you'll just have like seams in the middle. And then I do the underarm seams next. So that's from the bottom section of the yoke down to where the bind off is. So you'll go body to sleeve, and then I do the sleeve seams. This gets folded over. The sleeve seams and then the body together. And it's fairly straightforward from there, but I have a lot of sewing to do, a lot of ends to weave in, so I'm gonna go stream something. I'll be back. So I'm here in my kitchen and I've been assembling this sweater, and I was trying it on as I got parts of it assembled and it looked a little too long, and I assumed that was just an issue with my math, but I got almost to the end of assembling this and realized that the front is about 2 inches longer than the back. And theoretically this should not happen, especially when working with a knitting machine and knowing how long things need to be, but I think there's a problem with my row counter on my 270. When I gutted it to install the AYAB hardware, I had to take out the old row counter, and I installed a new one that's just kind of command stripped velcroed down to a thing, and occasionally it gets out of alignment and doesn't trip correctly. So I assume that while knitting the front piece, it just didn't trip for a while. So I wound up knitting more rows than I thought I did, and it's about 2 inches longer than it needs to be on the front. And if this were on the back, I think I would just leave it, because that's like a thing. I've seen a bunch of hand knit modern patterns where the back is a little bit longer than the front and they leave it open like a pleat thing here and it would be fine, but because it's the front, it's really weird. So we're going to perform some surgery. I'm not going to disassemble and redo this whole thing because it is almost done. Look at this, it's almost done. And I'm not going to take it apart, but what I am going to do is go in and place a lifeline in the front, probably like right around here, and then place a lifeline at the top of the section I'm going to pull out, and then unravel between the two lifelines and Kitchener stitch it back closed. The same way that I did with the first prototype when I had the sleeve twisted. I had to pull it off and put it back. It's going to be a lot of Kitchener stitch, and I could theoretically count the number of rows and figure out exactly how many I need to pull out, but I'm just going to eyeball it because that's where we are in this project. And if it's a little bit off, I'm just going to fudge it in the rest of the seam here. So let me put in my lifeline and figure this out. I have my two lifelines and I have checked, and if you fold this up here and you put that there, it'll about line up. So removing that much of the sweater should fix the problem. And I need enough of a tail that I can re-Kitchener stitch this, and I just need to cut it somewhere in the middle and start unraveling. And I need enough tail to weave in the ends once we get to that point. You know what, I can just cut something in the middle here and then unravel from there, and then I will for sure have enough tail. Okay. It's only scary. It's only a little scary. All right, my two sections are separated. And at this point, it's very scary. But the lifelines will keep everything from unraveling. Here is the sweater post-surgery, and you can't even tell where I removed a whole section. It just looks like a normal sweater. So let's try this on. There we go. That is a round yoke sweater knit on a knitting machine. Okay, I need to block this still, but we're good. Here is the final sweater after it has been washed and blocked. I did pin it out and steam it to get the top to relax a little bit and get rid of some of the wrinkles where the gathering starts. It helps, but it only helps so much because this is acrylic. On wool, it would do a lot more. I'm happy with this pattern. I'm gonna call it done for now, and it's up on my website for free. This is the round yoke sweater. There's a link in the description, and it only took 4 prototypes and 2 instances of major surgery. I think I am gonna leave a warning up on the pattern though, because it is kind of experimental and the yoke is dynamically generated, and while it should fit people who are significantly different size than I am, it hasn't been tested on any of those people, so proceed at your own risk. And let me know in the description if you have any issues with the pattern. Please tell me all of the measurements that you used and what you expected to happen and what actually happened. I need all that information to figure out what went wrong and see if I can fix it. I want to say a big thank you to all the channel members who support the work that I do here. If you want to become a channel member and contribute to the Yarn Fund, at the Machine Curious level and up, you get early access to new videos. At Machine Enthusiast and up, you get access to members-only videos, including the most recent one, where I did an unboxing of a bit knitter that was sent to me by a viewer from Australia. Bit knitter was the first hack I've ever seen for a knitting machine. It was made in the late 80s and let you control your machine by computer. And I'm trying to sort out something special for machine collectors and up. Stay tuned for that. All members also get access to a Discord where we talk about all things machine knitting, and I share some behind the scenes stuff. One last note. If you decide to make one of these, you will need a lot of waste yarn. About half of this is the waste yarn from the last 2 sweaters that I made, and I'm holding on to it because I have plans for it, so stick around to learn more about that in the new year. Thanks for watching. Happy knitting!
I never wove the ends in.